Did you know the Bible never once uses the word cross in the original manuscripts?
All right, let's see it.
The Greek word is stauros. It means stake or an upright pole.
So this content creator very clearly doesn't know Greek or much at all about lexicography or how lexicons work. The Greek word stavros can absolutely refer to an upright pole or a stake, and that was the primary sense in which it was used in classical Greek. And that could refer to a pile that was driven into the ground to serve as some kind of foundation. It could refer to a stake on which somebody would be impaled. But by the Hellenistic period, and specifically the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, it had also become lexicalized to refer to the practice of crucifixion, where it could refer either to the upright pole or to the patibulum, the horizontal crossbeam to which people would usually be attached. And this cross could be a capital T shape, it could be a lowercase t shape, it could be an X shape. There were a variety of different ways a cross could be formed. But by the time of the 1st century CE, by the time of the composition of the New Testament, stavros was commonly used to refer to a crucifix as it is understood today. And this is quite explicit in a lot of the literature that predates as well as postdates the New Testament. But let's look in a couple of the more authoritative lexicons. So for instance, here is LSJ, Liddell Scott and James, the most authoritative lexicon for classical Greek in the world. Stavros, upright pale or stake, of piles driven in to serve as a foundation. Sense number 2, cross, as the instrument of crucifixion. And we see this in Diodorus Siculus, in the Gospel of Matthew, in Plutarch, and in other literature. Now, we can look as well at the Cambridge Greek lexicon, stavros, the first sense, upright poles, stakes, palisade for reinforcing a wall or ditch. Sense number 2, piles supporting a platform. Sense number 3, stake for impaling a body. Sense number 4, cross as the instrument of crucifixion. And we can look in Artemidorus's Onirocritica, which is analysis of dreams from well before the composition of the New Testament. In one section, we have this reference to what it means to dream of crucifixion. To be crucified is good for all who are sailing, for in fact the crucifix is made from wood and nails, just like a ship, and its mast is like a crucifix. If the stavros, which is the Greek word being used here, is made from wood and nails, then it's obviously not just an upright stake. And if it's like the mast of a ship, then it has an upright portion and a horizontal portion. Now in Greek, they did not distinguish the two different parts of the crucifix. Stavros could refer to either, but in Latin, they did distinguish them. The Latin word patibulum referred to the cross beam, the horizontal beam that went on the upright beam. And we have a couple of interesting papers from Ruben van Vingerden that talk about the practice of carrying one's patibulum in Latin. So this is what we see in the Gospels. Jesus was made to carry his stavros, or his cross. This did not refer to carrying the whole cross. It did not refer to carrying the upright stake. It referred to carrying the patibulum. So Vingerden talks about the different literary sources from before the New Testament that talk about the carrying of the patibulum of the condemned person all the way to where it would be hung on the upright beam or pole. And we have the same tradition preserved in Greek sources, where stavros is the reference to the patibulum, to the horizontal crossbeam. And you can look in Cook's Crucifixion in the Mediterranean World for a wonderful discussion of the representation of crucifixion in the ancient Mediterranean world, and particularly in the New Testament. But we've got iconography that represents this as well. The Arieti frescoes from the 2nd century BCE here depict a man attached to a patibulum. And again, the practice of crucifixion could take different forms. So here he seems to be standing on the ground, and the patibulum is probably being supported by poles on either side. And we have other depictions of, for instance, Andromeda attached to a patibulum that is supported by either side, where she is simply standing on the ground. This is the Puteoli graffito, which depicts an individual named Alcamila who is crucified. And as you can see, there's an upright beam, and then there is a patibulum. There's a cross beam. This dates to around a century after the crucifixion of Jesus. And then there's the famous Alexamenos graffito, which has Alexamenos bowing before Jesus with the head of an ass upon a crucifix with an upright beam and then a cross beam. You can look throughout the literature, you can look throughout the scholarship, you can look throughout the iconography, and you see crucifixion represented in a few different ways, but one of the main ways was with a stavros that comprised an upright beam or pole with a cross beam that was attached to it, either at the very top or a little down further on it. And this is almost certainly what the New Testament is trying to represent. And we have a couple reasons for thinking that, particularly the reference to a sign being put over Jesus's head. If he was being hung on an upright stake, his hands would be above his head, and they would have said the sign was placed above his hands, not above his head. And then we also have Jesus talking about how Peter will stretch out his hands as a reference to Peter's own crucifixion. And the reference to stretching out the hands is consistent with the way the patibulum is referred to as the piece of wood on which the condemned individual stretches out their hands. So all of the data make clear that the crucifixion of Jesus occurred with a pole and then a patibulum or a cross beam. There's very little reason to doubt that.
John 19:17 says he carried his stauros, not a decorative emblem.
I don't know what decorative emblem has to do with anything, but again, the Greek word stavros could be used to refer to either of the two main parts of the traditional crucifix, either the upright pole or beam, or the horizontal cross beam, referred to in Latin as the patibulum.
In Matthew 27:32 and Mark 15:21, the same word, a stake. And when you go back and you check the concordance, you'll see it every time. Stauros means stake. Never once did it mean cross.
This is simply false, and again, this is obviously the outcome of trying to work with lexicographical resources without knowing anything at all about how lexicography works. For instance, if you're just leaning on a concordance and you don't know the language, you're going to be misleading yourself more than you're going to be helping yourself.
So why does every Bible translation we have today say cross?
Because literally centuries and centuries of research have made abundantly clear that that is, without a doubt, what it is referring to.
It's because Rome added it.
Entirely false. Rome did not become involved with Christianity directly until the 4th century CE. And in addition to the iconography I shared that all predates that time period, we have quite detailed discussions of the mechanism of the crucifixion of Jesus among early Christian writers that long predates that involvement of Rome with Christianity in the 4th century CE. This is wildly inaccurate.
And when you Google it, it'll say stake or cross, but here is where discernment comes in.
By discernment, of course, this content creator means naked intuition that is driven by dogmatism and identity politics.
If the Bible never once used the word cross, then how did we end up with it?
Through actual research.
And don't just take my word for it.
Oh, I'm not.
Go to the roots and study it for yourself. Look at the Hebrew and Greek.
Well, there's a critical step you're missing. First, you have to learn Hebrew and Greek. Then you can go look at the Hebrew and Greek. Otherwise, you're just going to be confusing your dogmatic intuitions for some kind of magical discernment when you don't know the languages you're trying to investigate.
If Yahusha carried a stake, why do we carry a cross?
Jesus' name in the 1st century CE in the Galilee would have been pronounced something like Yeshu or Yeshu, not Yahusha. That's not how anyone pronounced that name in antiquity. That's not how anyone transliterated that name in antiquity. And he carried a stavros according to the New Testament text, which again can refer to the patibulum that condemned individuals traditionally carried to the place of their crucifixion, which again would have involved an upright pole or stake and then the patibulum or horizontal crossbeam. So none of the information in this video up to this point has been accurate.
And more importantly, who told us to?
Nobody said anybody had to carry a cross. That's just a convention that developed within early Christianity.
The apostles didn't call it a cross. They said he was hung on a tree. And Acts 5:30 says, the God of our fathers raised up Yahushua, whom you slew and hanged on a tree.
So in addition to Yahush being a ridiculous transliteration of Jesus' name that was never used in antiquity by anyone speaking Aramaic or Hebrew, or by anyone transliterating the name into Greek or Latin or any other language, the word that is translated tree in most English translations of this particular passage out of Acts is xylon, which doesn't necessarily mean tree. It really means wood. And here's the entry in the LSJ for xylon. Wood, cut and ready for use, firewood, timber, etc. It can be logs cut square. Sense number 2 in the plural, also the wood market. We also have in the singular, piece of wood, log, beam, post. We can go down a little further and we have cudgel, club. We also have wooden collar as an instrument of punishment. Other instruments of punishments include stocks, or we have the gallows, or we have a bench or table, especially money changer's table. Sense number 3 of live wood, tree. Sense number 4 of persons, blockhead, a measure of length. So this has a pretty broad generic semantic range where it just means wood, and that wood can take a variety of different forms and shapes and functions. We can also look in the Cambridge Greek lexicon. Sense number 1, wood as a substance. 2, living wood, tree. 3, wood, specifying a particular kind of tree as the source from which particular things are made. Sense number 4, wood for burning, stick, log, wood. Number 5, piece of wood used in carpentry, building, log, plank, beam, post, or pole. Sense number 6, plural, collective, timber. Sense number 7, wooden part of a manufactured object, e.g. a writing tablet, instrument, animal trap, siege engine. Sense number 8, wooden object, seat, bench, counter, beam, perch, piece of wood. Sense number 9, piece of wood carried for beating, killing, or protection, stick, cudgel, club. Sense number 10, wooden shackle or collar, stocks. Sense number 11, cross for crucifixion. So xylon just means wood, and so this is just a euphemistic way of referring to Jesus' crucifixion by saying he was hung on some wood, or he was hung on a post or a beam or a pole or something like that, which lines up with the traditional Greek use of the word stavros as a reference to a crucifix, either the patibulum, as it's called in Latin, or the upright pole and the patibulum together.
And Peter said that boldly in front of the council. He could have said cross, but he didn't. He said tree.
Well, if he said stavros, which is the Greek word for cross, this content creator still would have misunderstood and misrepresented the text.
Galatians 3:13 adds, he became a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone hung on a tree. That's Deuteronomy 21:23, prophecy fulfilled.
So this is absolutely not a prophecy. This part of Deuteronomy is saying that if you execute somebody and then hang them on a piece of wood, impale them, put their head on a piece of wood, something like that, as a way to shame them or put them on display, the text says you have to take them down before nightfall because cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. So this is not a reference to what happened to Jesus. This is not a reference to crucifixion. However, when it gets translated into the Septuagint, the Hebrew word eitz, which also just means wood, is rendered xylon, which just means wood in a variety of different forms and fashions and functions. So for Paul, who would have been engaging this text in the ancient Greek translation, this aligns more with what he understands about the crucifixion. So it doesn't mean tree in the sense of a living, naturally formed tree. It just means wood, in whatever way that wood has been shaped and is being used, which is what the crucifixion was.
The Greek word is exelon. It means wood, tree, timber. Plain and simple.
So I avoid commenting on people's speech as much as possible, whether it has to do with accent or pronunciation or anything like that. However, when one is pretending to lecture the public about what ancient Greek and Hebrew words mean, they need to be able to display the most basic grasp of how these words were pronounced. And pronouncing xilon or xulon as exelon indicates that you do not have the first clue what you're talking about when it comes to the Greek of the New Testament, and therefore have no business lecturing anybody about what these words do and do not mean.
And it's used several times. Acts 10:39, Acts 13:29, and 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24. And every time it's tree.
No, every time it's xilon, which this content creator has just acknowledged refers more generically to wood in a variety of forms and fashions and functions, which very obviously includes a cross or a stavros.
Now Google may say cross, but the manuscripts say stake and tree.
No, they don't. They say stavros and xilon. Stavros is used to mean cross in this period and prior to this period and after this period. Xilon just means wood and can have reference to the wood of a cross.
The word cross was never in the text.
Well, of course, the English word cross was never in the text, but the Greek word stavros means cross, and the Greek word xilon can refer to a cross.
So if the apostles preached tree and the manuscripts say stake, then where did cross come from?
A basic grasp of Koine Greek.
And why did Rome want us to see that instead?
They didn't. You're making that part up because you don't know what you're talking about.
So how did stake and tree become the cross? Rome. When the scriptures were translated into Latin, stauros was swapped for crux.
It wasn't swapped, it was translated, because that is a perfectly accurate translation of stavros as the word was being used in the 1st century CE, as well as in the centuries before and the centuries after.
And that single change altered everything.
No, it didn't.
And then Rome introduced pagan symbols, the Egyptian ankh, the key of life seen in temples and carvings and in the hands of false gods who claimed divinity, the sun wheel, a pagan emblem of sun worship used in Rome and in Europe and across ancient festivals to honor the solstice.
Neither of these symbols was introduced by Rome to Christianity.
And the T of Tammuz, the Tau, a symbol of a false god condemned in Ezekiel 8, where Yahuwah shows Ezekiel the abominations in the temple.
This is entirely false. This is something that was just made up by Alexander Hislop in the mid-19th century to support his anti-Catholic rhetoric and his notion that everything that is Catholic ultimately derives from Mesopotamian religion. But there are absolutely no data from the ancient world that support this in any way, shape, or form whatsoever.
Rome merged these symbols into the faith and handed us the cross. And over centuries, it became not just a mistranslation, but an idol. Now people wear it, kiss it, bow to it. But Yahushua never told us to honor his shape. He told us to remember him in spirit and in truth.
Jesus never said that. In the Gospel of John, Jesus twice says to worship, not remember, the Father, not him, in spirit and in truth.
So if the Bible never once used the word cross, and Rome gave us that symbol, you have to ask, whose mark are you really carrying? The world's or Abba's?
Well, neither of those propositions is true, and all of this is just stuff that people made up to advance rather petty and naive attempts at boundary maintenance within Christianity. Please, do better. And the fit for this video has been Spider Punk.